G'day all you XTERRA warriors, Sam Osborne, back for your weekly instalment of Tuesday's Tips and Tricks. Today, we're talking about suspension. Another one of these things I think people neglect far too much. So I'm going to give you some baselines for you to start off with, and then you're going to go away on your trails and make some adjustments, and hopefully you have this bike dialed. To start with, we're going to talk rebound. That's how fast or slow your fork or rear shock returns back to you, depending on how you've got it set. Too slow, and every time you hit a bump, the fork or rear shock doesn't have a chance to come back to its neutral state or the top of travel. And so every time you hit a bump, it just keeps blowing through the travel until eventually you completely run out of travel and you just reach bottom out. Too fast, and the bike rides like a pogo stick. The fork or rear shock returns so quickly, there's just no point in having a beautiful dampener on your bike. The Rebound Adjuster is the red knob on your fork or rear shock. For me, my baseline, or how I ride most of my trails at home, for my fork, I run at 6 clicks from its slowest. My rear shock, I'm running 5 clicks from the slowest. Once we've got our rebound sorted, we need to figure out how much air we're going to put in these things. For me, I like to start with the rear shock, get that one dialed, and then adjust my front fork by feel based off that. Now the baseline for most rear shocks is we want to run it between 25 to 30% sag. So that's you sitting on the bike, feet on the pedals, without bouncing, and then just stepping off as gently as possible. That'll give you an indication of the sag. For myself, I actually like to run my rear shock quite soft, so I'm sitting bang on 30%, sometimes a little bit higher. When we're sitting the sag, there's a little rubber O-ring that sits around the rear shock and the fork. We'll push that all the way down, sit on it without bouncing as gently as possible, and step off the bike. Once I have my rear shock sorted, I'll then balance my front fork depending on how soft the rear shock feels. I want as balanced a bike as possible. Now, the bike industry came out with this pretty trick thing. Like I said before, I like to run my rear shock quite soft and balance that to my front fork. Now we've got volume spacers, which are little tokens we can put in our front fork. Scott, I can only comment on Scott because that's what I ride. Large bikes come with 1 token stock in them, smaller mediums come with none. The idea of tokens is that you can run a lower pressure in your front fork. It gives you a much suppler feel at the start of travel, but the idea of the volume spacer is the fork will ramp right up as you start to get to the end of travel. So when you jump on a kid's bike, it feels really nice because it's so nice and plush, but obviously you go through the travel really quickly. That's why we have volume spacers. That's how we can achieve that beautiful plush feeling, but not blow through our travel and always hit bottom out all the time. For myself, I'm running 3 tokens in my front fork, and as a rule, every token you add in, you can take 10 psi out of your fork. For me, as a 67 kg rider, I'm running 125 psi in my rear shock and 55 psi in my front fork. So once you've played around with your rear shock and fork setup, and you're feeling pretty happy with it out on the trails, next step on from that is to get one of these handy little gadgets. It's called a shock whiz. Now I'd expect most shops would have one of these lying around. If you are a regular, probably barter with them, negotiate, since you've spent so much money at these places that they should give you a trial for the day on the trails with one of these. It attaches to your fork and rear shock. We do it independently, and we'll just analyze how you ride, and then it will give you some suggestions on how to further tune your bike. Just a warning, it always does overread how much compression dampening you should put on, especially for a cross-country rider, so do tread carefully in that side.